The summer anime season has been rolling along for a couple weeks now, and I've yet to catch up with a bunch of shows currently airing. Last season I had the idea of doing a video where I rank all the new series that premiered, but I decided against doing it due to time constraints. Watching every show airing in a season would be quite the daunting task, as you might imagine, and I wasn't sure if it would be worth the time investment. I was originally gonna attempt to do it for this season, but once again I wasn't sure it would be worth it, so I decided to narrow down the scope a bit. There are quite a diverse lineup of isekai shows that premiered this season, so I thought it would be a good idea to rank them all. This video will be focused solely on the isekai anime that started this season, so shows like Overlord and Devil is a Part-Timer will not be included. There are currently 5 new isekai shows airing this summer, and each one offers something different for fans of the genre. First up is Harem and the Labyrinth of Another World, an ecchi harem isekai animated by the studio that produced the Higurashi reboot. This was the one show that I begrudgingly watched in order to do this video. I remember when this anime first got announced, my initial thought when seeing the key visual was, wait, didn't they already make this anime? The series I was thinking about was another fantasy harem show called The Hidden Dungeon Only I Can Enter, which aired last year. It was so terrible that I couldn't get past the first episode and ended up watching clips online later on. I was expecting something similar to that, and at the very least, what I saw wasn't nearly as bad. For those unfamiliar with the series, it follows a high school student named Kaga Michio who gets transported to a game-like world after visiting a strange website and starting the game hosted on there. To give the show some credit, it has a decent start with the beginning of the first episode featuring a very bloody and graphic action scene where Kaga is just slicing through bandits that were attacking a village. That definitely grabbed my attention. The way the idea of him being in a different world is introduced gave me Sora Online vibes when Kaga attempts to log out of the world before he realizes he isn't in the game. One thing I appreciate about the first 3 episodes is that it gave the audience time with Kaga without his harem. I was surprised given that, let's be honest here, the main draw for many people is the fan service and sexual content. I thought the characters would be introduced much quicker, but so far only Roxanne has joined him by the end of episode 3. Unfortunately, Kaga is not a very interesting character, and it's hard to get invested in what he's doing when his initial motivation is to buy a sex slave. The latter part of the first episode with the slave owner and the ecchi stuff is where it started to lose me a bit. The second episode where Kaga goes to the Labyrinth to make money so he can purchase the sex slave Roxanne was largely dull. The flash forward at the start of the episode was unexpected and more interesting than the bulk of that episode. Also, that action scene with the tree monster sucked, and it was way too dark and totally forgettable compared to the opening action sequence in the previous episode. The third episode was the best one so far, which I guess isn't saying much considering the quality of the rest of them. In that episode, Kaga decides to hunt bandits to make money quicker since the deadline to purchase the slave was approaching. There were some great scenes where Kaga's taking out bandits at their hideout. It was quite engaging seeing him try to stealthily kill the bandits in their sleep without alerting the others to his presence. It's moments like this in the action scene I mentioned earlier that makes watching the uncensored version kinda worth it. However, it's a double-edged sword for anyone who's turned off by the fan service and sexual content. Halfway through the latest episode is where the anime is starting to indulge heavily into that aspect of the show. The last 15 minutes of the 4th episode is nothing but unnecessary horniness. It's a total waste of time if you're not part of the audience the studio and the author is trying to cater to. During the sex scene, I texted one of my friends and was like, I think I might be watching hentai. I found the sex scene to be quite tasteless, but hey, I've seen worse in last year's redo of A Healer. As it stands, Harem and the Labyrinth of Another World is severely lacking when it comes to story and characters, among other things. To be fair though, I don't believe people are going into this series expecting complex characters or a deep rich world. Like I said before, the biggest selling point of this anime is definitely in its sexual content and explicit fan service, so I expect more indulgent sequences like those featured in episode 4. I imagine the intimate scenes and fan service will get more absurd and unbearable as other women from Kaga's harem is introduced. I would love to be proven wrong, but given what this series is, I don't think I will be. I feel like this could have been a somewhat respectable show without the sexual content and fan service. The writing would still need to be improved and the character designs for the women in Kaga's group would need to be fixed, and by that I mean give them proper proportions. To be honest, looking at Roxanne's body and that other big-breasted chick during the intro makes me want to vomit. Anyway, it would be hard for me to recommend this show for anyone who isn't into this type of ecchi anime. I can't say the series is complete garbage so far, since there are a couple good things about this show, those being the brutal graphic violence and the surprisingly dark tone. There were some decent moments with Kaga processing the fact that he murdered people. Unfortunately, I don't think it's enough to justify placing this any higher than D tier. The next anime I'm about to talk about I honestly don't have too much to say about compared to everything else on this list. My Isekai Life is about an office worker named Yuji who wakes up in another world after working overtime. He quickly discovers he's in a game-like world and has been given the class of Tamer, allowing him to enlist and command monsters he finds to aid him in his travels. Similar to another series I'll talk about later in this video, Yuji being a tamer and how that element is handled is what distinguishes this show from its contemporaries. This aspect of My Isekai Life is the most interesting in the beginning of the series, especially in the first episode where Yuji has to coordinate with his slimes and his wolf companion in order to defend a town against 10,000 monsters. As a tamer, Yuji can communicate telepathically with his team of monsters, or even monitor things from a distance too. Yuji can also transfer spells to his slimes, allowing him to fight from any range. With these abilities at his disposal, things play out differently than it would in other isekai shows, with Yuji assessing things through his slimes and giving them commands to eventually resolve a situation. While I appreciate that the show is offering a fresh new approach to things with its tamer protagonist, the novelty of him working with his monsters wore off very quickly when I was binge watching it the other day. To be honest, I personally found the majority of this anime to be quite dull so far, which is ironic considering that it's the most action-packed out of all the new isekai airing right now. The story so far involves a cult using magic stones and some old legends, one of which involving a blue moon. This mysterious cult is affecting the different places Yuji visits as he travels the world with his monsters. The main conflict with the Blue Moon of Salvation cult has been mostly uninteresting so far. I'm dreading another generic villain plot reveal based on the fact that the cultists keep saying, "Cleanse the tainted world," before taking their lives. I'm hoping their goal isn't something cliche, but that's the first concern I had upon hearing them use that phrase a few times. In addition to the story not being very engaging so far, Yuji is just a dry character. Tamer abilities aside, he's just another overpowered isekai protagonist. So far, there have been only a couple times where the character has struggled to handle a threat. Yuji has a lot of magical power and a plethora of skills, many of which he doesn't know the full extent of what they can do. After hours of watching him cast powerful spells and wow everyone around him with incredible feats, it just got stale to me, especially during episode 5 where he was just helping a village out collecting wood. It doesn't help that this character has such a bland personality. Yuji's lively slimes inject some much needed spirit and personality into this show. The most bit of enthusiasm Yuji has exerted so far has been in the brief scenes where he was eating some food at one of the villages. There's just nothing intriguing or endearing about the main character as of right now. There have been a few brief glimpses of his life as an office worker, but nothing special or incredibly insightful. As I mentioned before, this show has a lot of action in it, but unfortunately the animation isn't very impressive. This anime was produced by Rebel Root, the studio that co-produced Fully Coolly Alternative with Production IG. The animation is generally average and I thought that it, along with the art, could have been better, especially during the big battle in episode 4. To give the show some credit though, the author did switch things up by having Yuji have to get in close during the fight, and the animators clearly put way more effort into the scenes than the other minor action sequences. While My Isekai Life failed to leave a strong impression on me, I think anyone looking for a different isekai with a lot of action in it may enjoy what it has to offer. However, in my opinion, there just isn't enough here with its story or characters to keep me thoroughly engaged with it. For that reason, I'd put it at C tier. Next up is Uncle from Another World, a comedy isekai about a man named Yosuke Shibazaki who awakens from a coma after living in a fantasy world for the last 17 years, then starts living with his nephew Takafumi Takaoka. After seeing his uncle use magic, Takafumi decides to help him make money off of it by posting videos on YouTube. Occasionally his uncle would mention something about his time in the other world, which fascinates Takafumi, prompting his uncle to show him using his magic. Through these glimpses of Yosuke's memories, the audience gets to see what happened to him many years ago. This show has a very unique premise compared to a lot of the other shows in the genre. It has a slice of life feel to it in the sense that each episode really is just Takafumi and his uncle living their lives. This anime is a lot better than I thought it was going to be. As you'd expect, it has a very lighthearted tone and is actually quite funny. Some of the humor often comes from times when Yosuke is showing his memories to Takafumi, and he reacts to a situation in a way you wouldn't expect the character would. Yosuke's cluelessness when dealing with the tsundere elf, and the way the people in the other world view and treat him, make for some pretty funny moments. Additionally, this show has some cool references so far. If you're a gamer, you'll likely appreciate the references to Sega and retro games like Puyo Puyo that Yosuke loves. There's even a reference to a popular anime, which I won't spoil, that I'm sure would put a smile on the faces of many people. Comedy and references aside, the characters are just enjoyable to watch. I love how Takafumi's relationship with his childhood friend Sumika Fujimiya was written. I like how, similar to his uncle with certain things, he's oblivious to the fact that she has feelings for him. This series was animated by a fairly new studio called Atelier Pont d'Arc, which was founded only a couple years ago. The production is great for this just being their second show. I'll admit I wasn't a fan of this anime's art style when I saw the previews online, and when I started watching it a couple days ago, I initially thought it was ugly. However, after watching a few episodes, I've grown fond of it in much the same way I eventually came around to Mob Psycho 100's art style. All in all, Uncle from Another World is a solid comedy series so far, with a fresh take on the genre by showing what would happen if an Isekai protagonist came back to our world. With that said, I would probably place this at the top of C tier. I've talked about this next show in a couple of my previous videos on the channel, so I'll try to keep this one short and sweet. Black Summoner is my favorite new series of the summer so far, and much like my Isekai Life, offers something different from the standard Isekai experience by following the adventures of a summoner named Kelvin. Kelvin was reincarnated into a game-like fantasy world after a god made a mistake that resulted in his death. He is then reincarnated by the goddess Melfina, who agrees to become his servant after he falls in love with her. Before Kelvin is sent to the other world, he chooses the class of summoner and abandons his memories in exchange for more skill points. Being a summoner allows Kelvin to recruit servants, which he can summon to aid him in battle and communicate with in his head over what he refers to as the servant network. This concept of recruiting allies to assist him reminds me of the monster capturing RPGs I played as a kid. Especially the process he goes through to obtain the slime in the premiere. The way the summoning power works is unique and seems balanced from what I've seen so far. While this anime might not be as action-packed as the Monster Tamer show I mentioned before, its writing is superior and it has already introduced some likable characters. There are some very amusing interactions with Kelvin and his servants, and each character so far has a distinct personality. Kelvin, being a cool guy who is also excitable and battle hungry at times, is way more enjoyable to watch than a dry character like Yuji. One thing that makes the action more gripping than My Isekai Life is the fact that the main character is more vulnerable and not a powerhouse on his own. Kelvin might be a high-ranked summoner and can gain levels quickly, but his allies are a big part of his strength. He might be strong for his current level, but he isn't invincible and he knows that. Unlike Yuji, Kelvin has to earn his allies and had to sacrifice something to gain what he currently has. To reiterate what I said the other day, I like that there has been a cost the character has to pay in order to acquire something. For instance, forming a contract with a monster drains Kelvin's MP, which made him feel weak in the beginning. In contrast, Yuji can still cast spells while his MP is steadily plummeting in the red, and he didn't need to do much to obtain the magic he possesses. I believe that Kelvin is a much more endearing character, and the way the game-like world is written, particularly how it functions, is a lot better than the other series. Nevertheless, Black Summoner is a fun and refreshing isekai that I would highly recommend based on what I've seen so far. I would place it at the highest tier if its production was a bit better than the next show I'm about to talk about. The studio relies heavily on CG for one of its fights in the second episode, which is always disappointing to see, but at least it was decent looking. Also, I feel like I need to see how the group dynamic is once the next character joins Kelvin, and how the story develops, since at this time only 4 episodes have aired. So far, the pacing seems fine and the show has already subverted expectations with the introduction of a certain character. So for now, I would put this series at B tier. This last series I'm about to talk about I think has the potential to be something truly special. Parallel World Pharmacy is a medical isekai that takes place in a fantasy world where pharmaceutists not only create and distribute drugs, but also take on the role of physicians. The show is centered on a famous medical researcher, Kanji Akatani, who dies after overworking himself one night and is reincarnated in another world, taking over the life of a young boy named Pharma de Menezes. It's not long until Pharma discovers that he has the powers of the god of medicine, allowing him to create and eliminate matter and substances at will, and even see medical issues with his eyes using his hands. Utilizing these new powers and his medical knowledge from his previous life, Kanji wants to provide medicine to those that need it. Obviously, what distinguishes this anime from others in the genre is the focus on medical issues and medical treatment. The show goes through the typical beats of the main character learning about the world, and of course that includes magic, which in this case is referred to as divine arts. While seeing the characters use their divine arts is cool, watching Pharma diagnose and treat those around him is just as entertaining. Out of all the series I mentioned in this video, I believe this one is the most detailed, not only in regards to its world, but also when showing the process Pharma goes through to create medicine. When Pharma creates a substance that he needs, this is presented in an exciting way, as if he's using a powerful magic spell. As the character is making the medicine, he goes through the steps internally to make it. In general, I think the writing is very good so far, and I like that the author, Liz Takayama, touches on a real issue, the expensive cost of medicine, and the inability for those in need to get access to it. The animation, produced by Dio Medea, looks great, and the overall production seems at a higher quality than the other anime I've mentioned. Although Parallel World Pharmacy seems like a good show so far, I'm not sure if I'd recommend watching it for people into more traditional isekai series. I don't think this show will have a lot of action in it, so I think this show won't have as wide of an appeal as other series. Regardless, I think this anime deserves a spot at the top for its writing and animation. And there you have it, all the new isekai ranked. Let me know in the comment section below what you think about these shows and how you would rank them. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. As always, thanks for watching. I'm out of here. Peace.